Let me ask you a question. You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of what's going on.
Who are the people?
Projections in my subconscious.
Yours?
Yes. Remember, you are the dreamer. You build this world.
Mind telling your subconscious to take it easy?
My subconscious. Remember, I can't control it.
I can't control it. That is the most honest confession ever made about the nature of the human mind. The architect believes she is building a world, but the dreamer provides the raw, untamed content that truly defines it. This conflict is not a fantasy. It is the blueprint of your own mind. There is the conscious you, the architect that constructs the story of your life and believes it is in command. And then there is the silent background machinery, the dreamer, the true source of the raw, untamed thoughts that populate your reality. This is not a theory. It is an observable fact, and we will prove it now. I want you to decide, right now, what your very next thought will be. Do not wait for one to arrive. Author it.
The instruction was impossible. Because to choose a thought, you must first think of the thought you are about to choose. The choice itself must be delivered to you from the very subconscious you cannot control. The architect hears the dreamer's whisper and calls it its own voice. You are not the source of your thoughts. You are the witness to their arrival. So if the programmer was the first illusion and the architect is the second, what is left? What is the I that is listening to these words right now? The I that listens, the self that chooses. This is the primary suspect in our investigation. To deconstruct it, we will present evidence from 3 separate fields of inquiry, beginning with psychology.
Pillar 1. The illusion of conscious will. For centuries, we have trusted the feeling of intention as direct evidence of our control. But the first cracks in this foundation appeared in the 1980s. The groundbreaking and controversial experiments of neuroscientist Benjamin Libet first showed that measurable brain activity, a readiness potential, prepares for an action several hundred milliseconds before the subject is consciously aware of making any decision. The brain acts before the I is informed. But it was the work of psychologist Daniel Wegner that explained the trick, how the mind creates the powerful feeling of authorship even when it is not the author. His research demonstrated that the brain is a master storyteller, a function neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga identified in what he calls the left brain interpreter. This is a dedicated system that's driven to create a coherent narrative of our actions, even if it has to invent the reasons. The process is simple. Your brain subconsciously initiates an action. Just before the action occurs, it generates a corresponding thought. You experience the thought, then the action, and the interpreter creates a story. I did that. It mistakes correlation for causation. The critical counter-argument is that these experiments only apply to simple, immediate actions, but this misses the point. Wegner's work reveals that the feeling of intention itself is unreliable evidence. If your internal compass can be proven to be wrong, you can never fully trust where it's pointing. The entire system of trusting that feeling is broken. This storyteller, this after-the-fact narrator, is the first definitive crack in the facade of the self.
Pillar 2. The neurological riot. Every thought that enters your awareness is the final product of a subconscious chain reaction. For the split-second decisions we make all day, neuroscience has watched this happen in real time. Their leading theory for this is the evidence accumulation model. It reveals that a choice is not a command from a central self. It is the outcome of a neurological riot. Competing populations of neurons fire, gathering evidence and casting votes for different outcomes. This race happens subconsciously. A choice is simply the first signal to be built strongly enough to cross the finish line of consciousness. You do not make the decision. You are merely informed of the winner. The illusion is a two-part system. First, the brain's left brain interpreter, the storyteller we met in the last exhibit, immediately rushes to the podium to claim credit for the victory. But for that story to be convincing, there must be a main character. The hardware that generates this continuous sense of I is a circuit called the default mode network. This is the source of your internal monologue, the constant radio broadcast of a persistent self. This is the machinery of the illusion. The default mode network creates the protagonist. The left brain interpreter writes the script, explaining why the protagonist chose to do what it was already doing. The evidence shows the chooser is not in charge. It is a biological ghost assembled by separate systems in the machine it claims to command.
Pillar 3. The philosophical indictment. Science shows us the how. Philosophy reveals the profound implications. Long before neuroscience had the tools to map the brain, thinkers had already dismantled the self through pure reason and rigorous introspection. The philosopher Spinoza argued for a universe governed by an unbroken chain of cause and effect. For him, the feeling of freedom was simply a symptom of ignorance. You believe you chose an action because you are not aware of the infinite, complex chain of causes that produced the impulse. He saw no ghost in the machine, only the machine. But the most surgical deconstruction came from the Scottish philosopher David Hume. He proposed a simple experiment. Turn your attention inward and try to find the self that is supposedly having your experiences. You will find thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, but you will never find a single enduring entity behind them. This led him to his radical conclusion, the bundle theory of consciousness. The self, Hume argued, does not exist as a thing. It is merely a bundle of fleeting perceptions, constantly in flux. And halfway across the world, a 2,500-year-old introspective science, what we now call Buddhism, had already arrived at the same conclusion through a different method. Not rational skepticism, but rigorous meditative observation.
Their core doctrine of Anattā, or no self, states that there is no permanent, independent I. There is no captain of the ship. There is no passenger. There is only the river itself. The I is not a thing, but a process, a story the brain constructs moment by moment to create a sense of continuity where there is only change. Two different eras, two different civilizations, two different methods, one conclusion. Psychology proves the chooser is a storyteller. Neuroscience proves the storyteller is a biological process. And philosophy, from both East and West, proves the process is not owned by a self, for there is no permanent self to be found. The evidence is presented. The self you believe you are is an illusion.
The evidence for a deterministic, constructed self is overwhelming. But for the mind that is desperate to maintain its sense of control, there are two final, sophisticated escape hatches. Our investigation would be incomplete if we did not seal them permanently. Defense 1. The quantum escape hatch. The first defense comes from the strange world of quantum physics. It argues that the universe, at its most fundamental level, is not a perfect chain of cause and effect. It is governed by true, irreducible randomness. Perhaps, in that break of causality, freedom lives. This appeal to randomness is the last ghost in the machine, but it is a logical trap. It leads directly to what philosophers call the free will paradox. The paradox exposes that randomness is not an escape. It is simply a different kind of cage. A puppet whose strings are pulled by a predictable machine is not free, but a puppet whose strings are pulled by a random number generator is not free either. It is simply a more chaotic puppet. Freedom is not the same as chance. It merely replaces a predictable master with an unpredictable one. It does not set you free. Defense 2. The Kantian ghost. This leads to the final, most abstract defense, a ghost in the philosophical machine. The argument is this: perhaps the self you can observe, the psychological, neurological self, is indeed a machine. But what if this is merely a shadow projected from a truer, noumenal self that exists outside of space, time, and causality itself? This is an elegant idea, and it is, by its own definition, a perfect hiding place. Because in this investigation, we must ask the questions that matter. Where is the evidence? What is the mechanism? A claim made with zero evidence, which offers no mechanism and can never be tested, is not an answer. It is a dismissal of the case. It is a ghost story told to avoid the machine. The defenses have fallen. The escape hatches are sealed. The intellectual case for the chooser is closed. We are left with the machine, a biological puppet whose strings are pulled by a chain of causation stretching back to the beginning of time. But if this is the truth, if we are not in control, then what is the meaning of responsibility? What is the point of morality? Are we not simply slaves to our own programming? This is the final, terrifying question. And it requires a new framework, a new way of seeing.
This is the precipice, the edge of a terrifying void. If you are not in control, what is the point? This feeling is not the truth. It is the final illusion, the confusion between determinism and fatalism. Fatalism is the belief that you are a helpless log in the river of time, tossed about by currents you cannot influence. This is a philosophy of despair. Determinism is the understanding of the kayaker. The kayaker does not control the river, but by understanding its currents, by knowing that this action will lead to that outcome, they can navigate it. The knowledge of the chain of cause and effect is not a prison. It is the map that shows you the way out. You cannot change the past that created your present, but every action you take now becomes a new cause that will shape your future. This is the foundation for a new, more powerful form of responsibility. The old model of responsibility was about blame. It sought to find the faulty machine, the sinful self, and punish it. This is the logic of vengeance. It is useless. The new model is the logic of the gardener. A gardener does not blame a plant for having weak roots if it was grown in poor soil. Blame is irrelevant. Instead, the gardener understands the conditions that led to the problem and then works to change them. They add nutrients, they adjust the light, they cultivate the environment. You are not the faulty machine. You are the gardener of your own mind. You may not choose the initial seeds of your thoughts, but you can tend to the soil. You can learn to identify the patterns, understand the causes, and cultivate the conditions that allow for better thoughts to grow. So how does the gardener tend the soil? The tool is called meta-awareness. It is a simple, secular, and trainable skill, the ability to observe your thoughts and feelings as impersonal events without identifying with them. It is the practice of stepping back from the river and simply watching it flow. This is not a mystical idea. It is a neurological intervention. Neuroscientists have observed that the practice of meta-awareness actively reduces the chaotic chatter of the default mode network, the very hardware that generates the constant broadcast of the I. By practicing this skill, you are not just changing your mind, you are rewiring the machine. A thought is just a thought. An impulse is just an impulse. A sensation is just a sensation. They are not you. They are events you are experiencing. The cage was never locked from the outside. The bars were forged from the illusion of a single controlling self that is responsible for every thought. By letting go of that illusion, you are not losing control. You are letting go of the burden of a control you never had. You are not the prisoner. You are the awareness that perceives the prison. And in that realization, you are free.
The programmer has been exposed. The self has been deconstructed. You have been handed the key to the cage. But what do you do when you step outside and find an empty stage? What is the purpose of this freedom in a universe without a script? This is the final investigation, the Exodus.